So how do you figure out why a massive, devastating war actually started? Do you turn to a super serious, meticulous historian? Or do you listen to a comedian telling dirty jokes? Well, in this explainer, we're going to see how both of them, the playwright Aristophanes and the historian Thucydides, can give us the answer. Yup, you read that correctly. According to the most famous comic playwright in ancient Athens, the whole 27-year-long Peloponnesian War didn't kick off because of treaties or territory, but because of a fight over some prostitutes. It's a completely shocking, totally ridiculous claim. But here's the crazy part. What if I told you that buried inside this outrageous joke is a piece of truth so accurate that it perfectly matches the work of the greatest historian of that era? Okay, let's dive into this. So first up, meet our comedian, Aristophanes. Now this guy is not a historian. He's a playwright, and his whole job is to win comedy festivals by making the citizens of Athens laugh their heads off, usually by mocking the very politicians who were running their lives. The kind of stuff he wrote is what we call old comedy, and it was just wild. It was all about political takedowns, over-the-top plots, and a ton of crude humor. So the audience expected things to be exaggerated. You can't just take what he says literally. Or maybe you can. So in his play, which came out just a few years into the actual war, Aristophanes spins this story. A few drunk young Athenians go over to the nearby city of Megara and kidnap a prostitute. So, in revenge, the Megarians sneak into Athens and snatch two prostitutes from the house of Aspasia, who just happens to be the partner of Pericles, the leader of Athens. And boom, according to the play, that's what starts the war. It sounds completely bonkers. But if we look past the whole prostitute story for a second, Aristophanes mentions a very real political act that came out of this supposed squabble. And this right here is where it gets fascinating. What's really interesting is the level of detail Aristophanes gives. He says the furious Pericles passed a major economic sanction, the Megarian decree, that banned the Megarians from every market and port in the entire Athenian empire. He even gives the specific wording of the ban. Remember those terms, agora, sea, and shore. Because now, get this. Here's the account from our serious historian Thucydides. Just look at the language. It is nearly identical. A comedian going for a laugh and a historian trying to create a record for all time, and they use almost the exact same phrasing to describe the decree. This is huge. It's powerful proof that the terms of the decree were real and everyone knew about them. In fact, Aristophanes' joke version of events was so popular that the historian Plutarch, writing 500 years later, was complaining that whenever people talked about the cause of the war, they just quoted the play. The comedy routine had become the accepted history for the person on the street. But for Thucydides, the Megarian decree wasn't the real reason the war started. Nope. For him, it was just a pretext, a public excuse. He had a much deeper, more structural explanation for everything. You see, Thucydides makes this brilliant distinction. He separates the adiaia, that's the immediate complaints, the public finger-pointing like the decree, from what he calls the alethystate prophesis. That's the truest cause, the deep, underlying reason that basically made the whole war inevitable. And for him, that truest cause was actually pretty simple and pretty profound. The Spartans were absolutely terrified of Athens' growing power. It wasn't really about prostitutes or trade squabbles. It was about a massive shift in the balance of power. One superpower saw another on the rise and got scared. That's what made the conflict unavoidable. So who's right, the comedian with the dirty jokes or the serious historian? Well, the amazing thing is, they both are. They're just describing two different layers of the same reality. This chart really lays it out. Aristophanes is totally focused on the pretexts, the ATI, which gives us this incredible window into what ordinary people were actually talking about and what they believed. Thucydides, on the other hand, zeroes in on the alethystate prophesis, that deep structural analysis. They don't contradict each other at all. They complete the picture. Let me put it another way. Aristophanes tells us the story you'd hear people gossiping about in the marketplace. Thucydides tells us the story a political scientist would write 100 years later. And you really need both to understand what happened. But can a joke do more than just show us what people were thinking? Can it actually be direct proof that something happened? Well, let's look at one final example from that very same play. Elsewhere in the play, a character is satirizing some Athenian ambassadors who were sent on a diplomatic mission to Persia. He's complaining about how much they suffered, while, at the same time, describing this super luxurious trip with great pay and comfy carriages.
So you have to ask yourself, why would an Athenian audience back in 425 BC even find this funny?
Well, it's pretty simple. A joke, especially a political one, only works if the audience knows what you're talking about. They have to get the reference.
So, and this is the crucial point. The very existence of this joke is a piece of historical evidence. It proves that these diplomatic trips to Persia were really happening, that the public knew all about them, and that the cost and luxury of these trips were controversial enough to become a punchline. The comedy itself is proof.
All right, so let's tie this all together. What are the big takeaways? First, a silly source can actually contain super accurate facts. Second, Aristophanes shows us popular opinion, while Thucydides shows us the structural causes, and you really need both. And finally, satire itself can be powerful evidence that a subject was out in the open and people were talking about it.
Which leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? 2,000 years from now, when historians are trying to figure our world out, what are they going to look at? Will they find the truest cause of our conflicts in official government papers? Or will they find what we really cared about, what we laughed at, and what we got angry about in our memes, our viral videos, and our late-night comedy shows? Something to think about.